All right, so let's kick things off. What is software licensing? A software license is a legal agreement that provides legally binding conditions for the use and distribution of software. To a lot of people, however, it's that boring long bit of text you skip through and accept before you can actually use the software you're installing. Unbeknownst to them, however, there's an entire industry built on the back of reading and comprehending those terms, understanding all of the nuances, whilst ensuring they are adhered to in a cost effective manner, both to reduce overspend on software whilst actually managing and maintaining the risk in terms of compliance. The task at hand, however, is a challenge in its own right. The contracts you see on our slide at the moment are vast and complex to say the least, dictating in which circumstances the software can be used. Adding to this, licensing terms vary between software vendors and can change often, typically on a yearly and sometimes even monthly basis, where both the previous versions and the new versions need understanding, depending on what software you have deployed and their governing contracts. That being said, we can summarize that the rules are often built to scale license fees along with the perceived value of the product based on certain metrics. These metrics vary and have changed over time, where some are easier than others to understand. As an example of the introduction of user based licensing in software as a service products, a user requires a license and that license needs to provide them with the required functionality. However, most enterprise solutions today are based on compute infrastructure, where the license fee is proportional to the expected business value of the underlying compute the software can utilize. This includes, but is not limited to, variables like core count, virtualization methods, operating systems, clustering, high availability setups, disaster recovery, and more, where the underlying infrastructure and its controls dictate the license requirements of the software deployed on it. Based on this, a typical licensing assessment can be broken down into four, or potentially three parts. Data, discovering the required data in terms of software deployment and scope, and the underlying infrastructure it's deployed on, within the context of the licensing terms, of course. Using Microsoft as an example, which machines have Windows or SQL Server installed on them, what versions and editions are they, which of those machines are virtual machines, and what are the associated core counts, high availability rules, so on and so forth. Next, we've got licensing, understanding the licensing rules regarding the deployed software and scope. So what are the licensing rules around Windows Server or SQL Server? The contracts in place, so have they been purchased under an enterprise agreement or an MPSA or a CSP? And then lastly, the owned entitlement, aka what does the customer already own in terms of licenses? Lastly, we have the analysis piece, so combining the software, the hardware, and the licensing data together to ascertain the licensing position of the given environment. It's important to note that this slide shows the basics and the fundamentals of most licensing engagements. There are other nuances to consider, however, this is at the heart of most of the engagements to understand your software license position. So I've explained what software licensing is and how you can ascertain overspend or non-compliance, but why is software license management actually important? Simply put, cost and risk. The software market is estimated at $600 billion and growing, where 250 billion of that is enterprise software, all of which needs managing. Organizations need to ensure they are purchasing the right software under optimal contracts and in the right quantities to ensure cost optimization and return on investment for their software estate. Equally, they need to ensure they are compliant with the licensing terms to minimize risk in terms of compliance, as software vendors often withhold the right to audit organizations for non-compliant usage, which can often end in expensive settlements, lengthy audit processes, or even legal action. Typically, organizations have tens to hundreds of thousands of software titles deployed in their environment. However, to help balance risk versus cost, they tend to focus their efforts on the top vendors in terms of cost to the business, and risk in terms of compliance. Additionally to this, there are a number of additional aspects to consider, such as security, being able to identify vulnerable or disallowed software within an environment, productivity, unifying the software portfolio for a consistent and scalable approach, forecasting and finance, being able to understand software spend better and in detail, adds for a better budget management process, and much more. This practice is commonly known as software asset management, or SAM for short, focused purely on managing and optimizing the use of software assets within an organization from procurement through to retirement. Mature and more successful internal or external SAM practices are typically made up of three main components: people, where there is a team of dedicated and skilled professionals to ensure compliance with software licensing agreements. They track and manage software assets and provide guidance and support to other departments within the organization. There's processes, where well-defined structured processes are used to manage the procurement, deployment, retirement, and resale of software assets. These processes need to be integrated with other IT practices as well, such as IT service management and IT financial management, to ensure that the organization is utilizing its resources effectively. And then lastly, we have technology. Software asset management requires accurate and up-to-date data on software assets, with detail on what is deployed in an environment and the relevant hardware details required for license analysis. There are many ITAM tools in the market that cater to this specifically, providing both the data requirements along with the analysis and some ITAM functions. However, these tools actually come with their own issues. So we just described the solution in software asset management, right? Wrong. Whilst there is generic methodology, organizations globally still face significant challenges when it comes to managing their software licensing estate. Deloitte recently published a new report just earlier this week detailing some great examples supporting this. More than half of their survey respondents are specifically concerned about the lack of visibility in terms of IT assets that they have in their estate. There was a 200% increase in those requiring managed services to deliver ITAM requirements, and 80% of the respondents required third-party resources to deliver ITAM requirements as well. These are just 3 points from a much larger report published only this week, and there are more examples, countless examples of fact, of problems still existing in the market. So, how are your customers addressing their problems, and what problems do these solutions have? So these are the 3 most common solutions and their pitfalls. Professional services, where customers acquire external expertise to deliver managed or ongoing services, which are typically delivered via manually intensive work. These are costly and time-consuming services for both the partner delivering them and the customer procuring them. Manual labor is inconsistent and equally difficult to balance in terms of scale, ensuring resources are available for new customers as they come on board, whilst being utilized effectively to achieve a decent return on investment in terms of the partner. Next, you've got ITAM tooling. Traditional ITAM tools boast to be the be-all and end-all solutions, taking a one-size-fits-all approach, accomplish everything. Unfortunately, these solutions are often costly, requiring a significant deployment and services overhead, only to end up being underutilized in comparison to the actual problems the customer wishes to solve. And with this generic approach, it also often comes with a lack of focus where required in terms of things like discovery capabilities and the analysis as well. These solutions can be fit for purpose with the right investment and time. However, for a lot of organizations, it does not provide a good return on investment with the value received. Lastly, customers can look to manage this internally. Unfortunately, good talent is few and far between and is sourced from the same talent pool the partners hunt in, making resources expensive and short of supply. Training from within is equally as difficult to do due to the lack of resources available in the market to train. The time required to do so, the cost required to do so, and the constantly changing landscape when it comes to licensing with a never-ending education.